Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is Module 3, Government Agency Clearance Rules and Regulations. I'm just going to go over some few housekeeping items, and then I will have Dr. Eric Berger take the rest of the time. So please make sure your name on Zoom is the name that you registered with. If you are calling in, please make sure to email me or Austin Schock. I will put our emails in the chat. Please make sure that you provide us with the phone number that you dialed in on and let us know that you attended. You must attend for the majority of the call to count for a credit. And you do not need to register again for the next sessions. We have you if you have already registered. I think that takes care of it. If anybody has any logistical items, just shoot me an email or put a question in the chat and I'll make sure to answer it. Thank you guys so much. And Eric, take it away.
Thank you all. Today is the third module. Today we are going to talk about some of the rules and regulations and directives governing the clearance process. It will be a little bit of a slog, apologize for that, but the incentive is that I promise that I will get to how we deal with that catch-22 of needing a clearance to get a job, and to get a job, you need a clearance. To recap, where we've been, we've discussed all the cool places you can work, both inside and outside of government with a clearance. We gave a broad overview of the clearance process, and in the last module, we did a deep dive into the start of the clearance process, which is the standard form 86. I do have to give a disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. I am not giving you legal advice. So if sometime down the line you say, well, Professor Berger said it was okay, that's not okay. If you do need real advice, see a real lawyer to get that real advice. The other great resource that you would hopefully have available to you is in the clearance process, your facility security officer, or someone from the security side of the organization, whether it's the government or a contractor. They can give you a lot of help and advice. Again, I am not a lawyer, not giving legal advice. So where does the clearance process come from? This is a little bit of a review, the next few slides. It is the law. Again, it is not made up on the whim of an agency. There are laws. From those laws, the president creates executive orders and presidential directives, and different agencies may have regulations. Again, everyone is treated the same way. The rules are clear and uniform. If you have a protected status, that cannot be used against you. And it cuts across agencies. The idea is if you get a clearance at a particular level at one agency, that should be portable to another. We're going to talk a little more about that later today. Again, a review, these are all jobs that are looking at people who are in positions of public trust. And we will start with your grandfather's or your grandmother's executive order, Executive Order 10450, which comes back to the early 1950s. So this is right as the Cold War is heating up. And these is the security requirements for government employment. Basically, what the government is looking for is that you will be reliable, trustworthy, of good conduct and character, and of complete and unswerving loyalty to the United States. Right in that first executive order, it's not just a concept, it's written down. The American tradition that all persons should receive fair, impartial, and equitable treatment at the hands of government. This is why we have uniform rules for how these different clearance cases are handled. But a few things also to remember. It is a privilege to work for the United States. It's a privilege to work for a contractor that's working on behalf of the government. So on the one hand, this and the whole process is called adjudication. You're being judged, whether you're able to have the public's trust, to have that clearance, you're cleared to have that public trust. So it's going to be consistent and no less than minimum standards. We're not going to say, I like you, so therefore I'm going to ignore this area that really kind of says you're not trustworthy or you're not likely to be trustworthy. But at the same time, that it's a fair and impartial process. Part of the executive order is that everyone is investigated as appropriate to the role that you're applying to be in. And we are going to talk a bit again about clearance levels, but we talk, about, causing harm to the United States, significant harm, grave harm. This is the degree of the adverse effect should someone violate that public trust. And so that kind of dictates how much your background is going to be investigated. If your position, you really can't do that much harm to the United States, will be a different level of investigation than if your position is something that could end the economy of the United States or give our enemies an ability to severely impact our armed forces. So the idea is you're investigated as appropriate and as detailed as needed. The reason I pulled this out is this is where we have the mention of a full field investigation. So these questions of your background and employment records and police records on the SF-86 come from. This last bit is also, explaining why, the FBI may be visiting your neighbors and roommates and office mates. That's part of this full field investigation if you're in a position where the breach of trust could have a material adverse effect on national security. This is a teaser for the Catch-22. Executive Order 10450 did introduce a concept of an interim clearance, saying at that time it was, in case of emergency, someone might be able to get an interim clearance before the clearance process is completed. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this when we get to what are called the seeds. The other thing introduced is this concept of continuous scrutiny, and we touched upon this in the last module, that this is not a once and done process, that if something develops after the clearance process is completed, then basically it's a requirement that new information, that development is considered, and depending on the severity of what happened, it might cause a review of your clearance, or maybe adjudicate your clearance to the point where your clearance is revoked. And that, this is section 5 of that executive order. Here's section 6, basically stay good. So if something happens that would indicate you're either not as trustworthy as the government thought, or something happened that could put you in a position where you're not as trustworthy as the government had decided you were, then you can basically lose your job. You can suspend your employment while they work it out. They can terminate your employment. A lot of bad things can happen. The advice here is, if you are good, stay good. There are some explicit guidelines. So again, what we don't want is one agency or one adjudicator to kind of decide whether or not you're good or not, whether or not you should have the public's trust or not. We want some uniform standards. Now, of course, some of these things are kind of fuzzy. Like number 2 is pretty straightforward. Any deliberate misrepresentations, falsifications, or omissions. This is why we say over and over again, if in doubt, just declare it on your SF-86. If you lie about something and see omissions of material facts are on there as well. If you neglect to say something, well, that's an indicator that you might not be trustworthy. Again, I call this your grandfather's or grandmother's executive order. Number 3, being dishonest, immoral, notoriously disgraceful conduct. That's kind of an interesting language. We don't use that anymore. Habitual use of intoxicants to excess and drug addiction. And notice they have those as 2 separate things, alcohol being treated a bit differently than drugs, but still the point being that's, a sign that you might not be trustworthy. I put sexual perversion in square brackets there. It's actually still there, but in the past 70 years, the definition of perversion has kind of changed to where things are now protected. So again, it really comes down to that 5th bullet point. What the government's looking for is, would you be subject to coercion or influence or pressure? And under that coercion, would you kind of be forced to act contrary to the best interests of national security? Clearly, if you've done some acts of sabotage or treason or espionage or sedition, that's an action. We can say you did that. You're clearly not acting in the best interests of the United States. But other things that kind of will explain, again, some of the questions in the SF-86, but also explain some of the activities around your full scope investigation is like if someone is a spy for a foreign hostile power and you keep going out and drinking with them, unless of course that is your job. Some people that is their job in counterintelligence, but for most of us that's not our job. That's probably an indicator you might not be trustworthy. Likewise, if you're out there saying, we want to, violently overthrow the government, we want to assassinate members of Congress, that is advocating the use of force or violence, which again is an explicit indicator that says you're not trustworthy. Given recent news, the advice, again, I'm not giving legal advice, but the advice I would give is don't be stupid. Here are 3 high-profile cases of people who violated this explicit guideline. The intentional unauthorized disclosure to any person, and yes, posting on Wikipedia or posting Discord is considered disclosure to a person, of security information or any other information disclosure which is prohibited by law. And clearly, these were cases of willful violation or disregard of security regulations. So don't be the next Edward Snowden Chelsea Manning, or we'll see what happens as the court cases go through. But Jack Teixeira, we don't want this to be you. So with all of that going by, let's quickly review, but then dive into access to classified information. First, we look at the classification levels, and this comes from ODNI's classification guide. Basically deals with, again, is it foul or misconduct, right? Unauthorized disclosure that could cause damage. That kind of information is confidential. Serious damage, the secret information. And exceptionally grave damage is top secret information. And again, there's some information that could cause exceptionally grave damage, but it's kind of like super exceptionally grave. And we want to protect it even further. So you might hear things like special access programs that create sensitive compartmentalized information, or Q information in the Department of Energy. So those are all at basically the top secret level, but it's like top secret, but no, really, we're very serious about it. There are other levels of classification, which I went over in the first module, such as controlled and classified information, things like social security numbers, banking information, home addresses, and obviously unclassified information is a level of classification. This is information that basically does not have restrictions. Basically, there's a lot of things in context. So again, talk to your security officer, even if the question is, can I disclose unclassified? Executive Order 12968 does talk about this concept. We talked about it in the first module. We talked about it in the second module. We're going to talk about it today. We will probably talk about it in every module. Is a need to know. So there's a two-step, and this actually talks about the third step, but there's a two-step process. The first step process for the clearance is, are you eligible for access? Do you have the trustworthiness that we could share a secret with you? But then you need a demonstrated need to know. Just because you have clearance does not mean necessarily that you have a need to know a particular piece of information. The third bit that was brought in is signing a non-disclosure agreement. So you actually enter into a non-disclosure agreement with the United States government, acknowledging that you understand that you're going to have access to these secrets, that these secrets could cause serious or grave damage to the United States should they be disclosed, and that you understand that the government's going to come after you. That you have legal liability for if you do become one of those individuals that I mentioned on the earlier slide. The other thing that this executive order noted is continuous monitoring. Basically, even with that clearance, and we talked about that in the 1950s, you'll be continuously subject to review. I'm going to talk about this a little bit further when I talk about the seeds, but that basically the government will be monitoring you, or has the right to monitor for you, while you have your clearance and for a period afterwards. And what are they looking at? Relevant financial records. So many times we hear of spies who had anyone just looked at their bank account. They're making $110,000 a year from their government job. It's the only job they're supposed to have, and all of a sudden they have $500,000 in their bank account. The government's allowed to monitor that. They're allowed to monitor consumer reports, credit reports. Are you all of a sudden in deep debt? How are you going to pay that off? Well, we don't want you paying that off by getting bought off by a foreign agent. Are you doing travel? This is something that's going to come up over and over again. In fact, if we look at the very next section of this executive order, as it's talking about financial disclosure, you need to file a financial disclosure report. Depending on your job and circumstance, you may be required to base, for example, say, what stocks do you own? Do you own any property in a foreign country? And you are likely to be subject to annual disclosure requirements. What's changed in the past year? And again, you need to report foreign travel. In most positions, and this is again why I'm not giving legal advice, because I won't know what your position will be and what it will require. But for most positions, you'll need to ask for permission to do foreign travel. In some situations, inadvertent travel to Canada or Mexico, you're flying from New York to Detroit and the plane gets diverted to Toronto. Obviously, you didn't plan for that, but even that you need to report. This is where what we call reciprocity is memorialized. Basically, if you've gotten a top secret clearance from the Department of Defense, it should be good as a top secret clearance in the Department of Energy. Things are though not as easy as that might sound, in that the Department of Energy may have additional requirements. The NSA may have additional requirements. So they can't make stuff up, but they can say to access this special access program, maybe you need a polygraph. And so, for example, a polygraph is not a requirement for a top secret clearance, but in a particular agency to get access to a particular program, you do need a polygraph. So that wouldn't be, they're making it up for you. Everyone in that program needs the polygraph. So even though you might have a top secret from one agency, doesn't mean you automatically have access. A person did just bring up a good question about travel. It's actually with a caveat, all travel. So clearly leisure travel. I'm going on vacation, I'm going on a cruise, I'm going backpacking. You need to declare. If you are doing, if you're working for the government and you're doing travel, usually part of your travel authorization is they tell the security office. Clearly, if there's work for your job knows about it. Most definitely talk to your security officer if you're working at a contractor. In many situations, even if you are traveling for official travel, you will need to do a pre-trip approval and a post-trip debrief. And the other bit about that is, the other bit about that is you do need to declare, in most instances, if you meet with agents of a foreign government. So for example, I was at a White House event last Friday. there were people from the government of Japan and the government of South Korea, I had to send a report in to my security officer saying I met with these people, even though it was a White House event. You would think that the National Security Council knows who I'm talking with. I still have to report that. It's a little bit different if you're in government, if you're meeting those people, and again, depends on your situation, you might not need to declare it. So again, over and over again, talk to your security officer. I did talk about generally, and you'll notice, let's start with B on this slide. Clearances are generally only offered to United States citizens. However, there is an exception. When there is a compelling reason and the person has special expertise, you may get a limited access clearance, and it's limited both by what you can access. You don't get this full transportable goes anywhere clearance. It's limited by time. It would be limited to the level of clearance that that foreign nation would have access. So for example, there's a group called the Five Eyes, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, which has a little bit higher access than France and Germany, which you would not be surprised have much higher access than someone from Iran or North Korea. So, it's not a backdoor way for people from those countries to get in. And this is only if they can do a real full scope investigation, a 10-year look back. And basically, if there's any doubt, if there are things that are just coming up questionable, the likelihood of getting that clearance is pretty small. I did want to touch upon, again, it's not the 1950s anymore. I believe 968 was around 2004, 2005, and it made it clear, because unlike the 1950s, your race is not an indicator of trustworthiness. Your sex is not an indicator of trustworthiness. Your religion, your national origin, your disability, sexual orientation, these things are not factors that are counted negatively during clearance. And in fact, if you believe they are, that is grounds for challenging a negative adjudication. The other one is mental health. Sometimes people ask, I had some issues and I, should I go get counseling? Because, that might be something to declare. Thing number one, that is not an automatic disqualification. In fact, thing number two, counseling can be a positive factor. Let's say you had a gambling issue 5 years ago and you got counseling, you've been clean, you haven't had an issue. That would be something that would be taken into consideration. Again, if you just racked up $1 million of gambling debts yesterday, that's probably indicative that you'll have a negative adjudication. So it's not the 1950s anymore. In terms of what happens if the government, well, first actually, before that, if you don't need a clearance, you don't get to keep it. If you change jobs to a job that does not need access to cleared information, your clearance goes to the inactive state. If your job, you didn't change jobs, you're still doing what you were doing. Maybe you're working at a contractor as a cybersecurity engineer, and you were working on a project that was for DoD. And so you needed clearance to do your job. But the contractor you worked for is now having you work for a bank doing cybersecurity engineering. You probably do not need to have the level of clearance you had working on a DoD network, as you have at a bank network. And again, your clearance can go inactive. So that's the first thing. Again, need to know, but here it's even need to have. But the other is if you are denied a clearance, if the adjudication process comes up negative, there is a process for protests. You can challenge a denial. Someone had asked in an earlier module, people in my family have criminal records. You may have an adjudicator who says, oh, well, there's no way you could possibly be trustworthy. Well, that's not right. Right? All individuals are taken individually, and you can challenge that that decision. And if another adjudicator and the head of the agency say, yeah, no, that's not right. You're the first in your family to go to college. You've already shown that you're doing something different. You could challenge, and you could have a successful adjudication. That said, the buck stops with the agency head. If they say, yeah, no, really, it's no, then it's no. There's no other place to go. Again, that's a thing for involving lawyers. So I'm not a lawyer. And if you want to see the the directive, what the rules are for that, it's seed 9. Now you might say, hey, we've said this term seed twice. What is a seed? So a seed are security executive agent directives. The security executive agent is the director of national intelligence. And there are a number of directives. I believe we're up to 9 or maybe 10. I'm focused on a few of them. One of them is seed 4. These are the adjudication guidelines. This is like a 30-page document. I've just put down the guidelines, and I'm going to do a dive on, in fact, only one of these. But this is, again, where those questions on the SF-86 come from. Do you have an allegiance to the United States? So they're asking kind of the negatives. Are you a member of a terrorist organization? Are you funding terrorism? Are you advocating the violent overthrow of the US government or violent harm to members of the government? By the way, if you're wondering, the answer is yes. If you look at SEED, if you look at the executive orders, the president and vice president are not subject to most of these regulations and requirements. So there is a consistency there. The foreign influence ones, this is where the SF-86 question's asking you, are you married or living with a foreign citizen? Foreign preference, do you carry a foreign passport? Dual citizens, you're a US citizen, you are clearable, but you'll probably get a little bit of a closer look. Sexual behavior, again, this has changed over the years. 70 years ago, LGBTQ, definitely not invited. Today, that's a protected group. But if you're promiscuous with any flavor of partner or partners, if you rape people of any persuasion, that is saying you're not trustworthy. So that's going to be looked at. Now, polyamory, does that mean, oh, you're in a polyamorous relationship, you're not going to get it? No, not necessarily. That's, again, it's not the 1950s anymore. It'll be up to the adjudicator. If you're in a long-term relationship with, a total of 3 people, that's a thing that will kind of depend. Financial considerations, are you in money trouble? So, these are where the SF-86 come from. I'm going to drill down into the personal conduct one, and not because it's the only one that's important, because these are all done. All of those sections have kind of two parts. The things they're looking at that are indicators of compromise and mitigations. Just because something happened, but is it serious? And this is not all the text of this section. This is like more than a page worth of stuff. But things like, and again, we say it over and over. In fact, this is where if you were in a class, you would all say it to me. Deliberate omission, concealment, or falsification of relevant facts. So declare everything. Deliberately lying. Don't lie. And here's one that's, it's a guideline. If you have a minor this and a minor that and a minor the other thing, typically if it's a minor thing, it could be mitigated, but wow, there's a lot of little things here. We do say a lot of little things add up. Because of that anecdote from that first module, association with persons in criminal activity is going to be a thing that's going to get scrutiny. Does that mean you have a family member in prison, you can't get a clearance? No, not at all. It does mean, you'll get a full scope probably. Mitigations. So you forgot that you went on a trip to Canada. Well, when you get back, call your security officer, let them know, fill out the paperwork. What if your lawyer, again, I'm not your lawyer. Let's say your lawyer said, hey, don't declare that. Yes, you were in a court case, you won, you were totally exonerated, don't report it. Well, there's a section that says, like, have you ever been arrested? So you actually do need to declare that. Again, talk to your legal counsel, not me. But if the government basically says, no, that's not right, and I would offer, if your counsel agrees, if you then go, whoa, wow, well, yeah, I didn't, my counsel told me not to, but I would have, here it is, and you do that fully and truthfully and promptly, it's a mitigating factor. If it's a minor offense and a long time, something you did when you were in high school, and it's not likely to recur, that's a mitigating factor. I mentioned like the gambling addiction. If you said, yep, I had problems, I seeked help, I haven't done it since, that's mitigating. For the people at Virginia Tech, I just got the notice of a robbery that wasn't a robbery. Sometimes something pops up that really isn't true. This is why we have the adjudication process. That's clearly a mitigation. Things where you were unwitting participant and it cast doubt that, or doesn't cast doubt on your reliability, again, that's a mitigating circumstance. Another one of the seeds deals with social media. And again, this has been in the popular press. And the answer is yes, the government can monitor and archive your publicly posted social media. So, if you do that stupid tweet and then delete it, the government still got it. Assume the government has it. Something that when social media monitoring was first done, which I can't remember if the Supreme Court or Congress decided, but the answer is no, the government cannot make you give them your password so that they can see all your private stuff. They can't make you show your private posts. They cannot friend you. On some platform, friends get access to more information than just the general public. The government cannot make you do that. And if they do, you may, you need to decide what you want to do with that. Please, please, please do not do an Edward Snowden and just, start releasing data because the government may be doing something wrong. Follow the chain of command. You would be helping your agency or the agency you serve if you're a contractor by letting them know that what they're asking is illegal, if they're asking for your passwords or linking to you. This comes up a lot. And that is, how long is my clearance active? So the first thing is SEAD 6 actually codified. Remember I mentioned that in the early 2000s, the government realized, hey, there's this thing called credit reporting bureaus. We can subscribe to it and see when things are happening. Well, this has been codified and now it's inactive. It's not we actually do. Monitor your credit report, monitor arrest records, monitor financial transactions. If something pops up, it gets flagged for further investigation. So if you have a DUI ticket, as I said, ticket, not, you've been convicted, tell your security officer. There's a form for that. If you won the lottery, tell your FSO, there's a form for that. It doesn't mean you can't have the money. I saw this in a different context at an agency I used to work at. Someone inherited a bunch of stock that at that agency they were not allowed to own. They declared it, right? And then they disposed of it. But the fact is they held it for a while. That gets flagged. And it's for further investigation. In that case, the investigation was, oh, they declared it and they sold it. That's totally fine. Nothing changes. But if you don't declare it, they're like, well, this is like a double indicator of compromise. The first indicator is something happened, like you had a DUI or unexplainable foreign money. That brings things into questions, and you didn't report it. That really brings things into question. The answer to the question, how long is it good for? 5 years for top secret, 10 years for secret, 15 years for public trust. But the reality is there's such a backlog. You fill your SF-86 after 5 years on your top secret. That's probably all that's going to happen. There's probably not going to be a full interview and field investigation. Your mileage may vary. I'm not giving legal advice. You may very well have the whole 9 yards at that point. This is just what's kind of going on right now. The other bit, again, we talked about it, Executive Order 12968. If you no longer need a clearance, you will no longer have your clearance. What about that catch-22? Your first job is actually addressed in SEAD 8. So you need a clearance to get a clear job. And literally the only way to get a clearance is to have a job that requires a clearance for a clear job. So there's that catch-22. And so SEAD 8 outlines the rules, because again, we want uniform rules for getting a temporary clearance. And some of you may have worked internships or something like that, and you've gotten, you may have gotten a temporary clearance. Basically, you fill in your SF-86 and an authorized adjudicative agency looks at it. So probably more than where you're working will look at it. And, it'll not show tons of drug use and tons of bankruptcies and tons of money being owed. So it's likely you're going to get your clearance. They will verify your citizenship. They will initiate the expedited investigation. Investigations can take months to years. So clearly it's temporary clearance, they're not going to wait years, but they're also not going to give a temporary clearance to someone for whom the process is not started yet. This is actually for top secret, but this is where it kind of counts. There will have to have been an FBI fingerprint check with a okay result, a name check with an okay result. The National Crime Information Center check, C-date basically says it needs to be started, and then the agency can decide, do a risk-based analysis. I think the reality is that, they'll wait for that to come back too. But again, the reality, even for the temporary clearances, it can take weeks or months. And so on the one hand, yes, a cleared person is more likely to get that job, but it is a way to get the foot in the door. And yes, you will probably have the most boring job on the planet until your clearance comes through and you can start working on the good stuff. I do have one question in the queue if you have questions. But before I get to the questions, this is where we are at in the process. The next time we will take a hit, pardon the pun, on drug use. We're going to look at the seed in particular. There's a separate seed. There's a particular law called the Bond Act or the Bond Amendments that relates to marijuana, CBD, and other drugs and substances. So with that, the first one is, I'd mentioned that clearances come in various levels, public trust, secret, and top secret. And so as you're kind of going up the chain, do you need to get a separate clearance? The answer is yes, and. So when you go from secret to top secret, you might recall that Virginia Tech's FSO had that nice graphic of things you need to do at secret and then the extra stuff for top secret. That extra stuff is done. The stuff you already did for secret, it's been done. They know where you live. They may have talked to your neighbors. They don't need to do that again, but they do need to do the additional stuff. And yes, if you got a secret at DOD and you're getting your top secret at DOE, they're supposed to transport all that stuff over that was done at DOD, but any extra stuff, and of course the extra stuff for top secret needs to be done. One question that was asked is, what happens if you send money overseas to family? Will that flag you? Well, first of all, flag yourself, declare, and I think there is a place for it because it's not uncommon that, you send remittances to family overseas. If they are members of a terrorist organization, you will not get a clearance. Even if this money is not financing terrorism per se. Actually, I spoke too fast. I'm not an adjudicator. I would almost hope that that would be a problem because money is fungible. But just declare it. But if you're, sending money to like a, Central American country, and you're doing it every month, they're not going to flag you every month. You just basically say, hey, this is what I do. Now, if all of a sudden you send a lot of money, that might get flagged. If all of a sudden you send money someplace else, that might get flagged. Again, the flagging process is just saying, hey, take a look at this. And, the investigator is going to say, yeah, you know, we know that person does that. That's fine, not an issue. Someone asked a question, you know, what kind of clearance, and I'll use a different agency to protect people here. I got my first clearance when I was at the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. So it's not a direct member of the intelligence community. It's not a direct member of the Department of Defense. But we need to know what's going on around the world, and we learn about stuff that we need to share. It is critical infrastructure. The country is in a world of hurt if communication networks don't work. And so I got, you know, first a secret and then a top secret clearance from sponsored by the FCC for my job. Now, that doesn't say that the FCC has a level of clearance of top secret. It's, I had a need to know information that could cause extremely grave damage to the United States if that information was leaked. So it's not what agency you are at that determines what level of clearance a particular job might need. It's what are the needs of that particular job. Clearly, if you're working for the intelligence community, working for the NSA, walking in the door, most everything is going to be at that top secret level. But at other agencies, there are many jobs that are only public trust and other jobs that might require special access program levels of clearances. Another question was someone who's had a secret clearance in the past. This is part of where that, you know, 5, 10, and 15 rules kind of come in. If it's within like the last 5 or for secret 10 years, it would probably be pretty easy to reactivate that clearance. It's a way of reducing the backlog because especially if you like were in the armed forces, you had a secret clearance, you got out, you got your master's degree, 2 years have gone by, you're now going to go for a clear job. Why do all the reinvestigation? We know what you've been doing. Hopefully they will look at that past 2 years, but also hopefully since you've gotten a clearance before, you know what records you need to keep, and it would be an easier process. Not a guarantee, but you know, hopefully it would be a more streamlined process. Those are all the questions that we have here. I do want to leave it open for maybe another minute or so if anyone else has any questions, or if I thought I answered your question, but I really didn't, feel free to type it in again. Seeing none, Kendall or Austin, any closing housekeeping remarks?
Just a reminder that we have our module 4 slotted for May 24th from noon to 1. So you'll be getting our calendar holds. You'll get the day before email and the day of email. And we sometimes are really nice and we send a week out email. So just be on the lookout for that. Again, you do not have to register. Again, if you guys have any questions, you can shoot me or Austin Chalk an email, and I sent that in the chat. We'll be happy to answer any of your questions. But thank you so much, Eric. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for your time, and look forward to seeing you next month.